I'd like to start by extending a warm welcome to you all on today's webinar on how to furlough your employees. Until the outbreak of the COVID-19, the word furlough was not a term that most people were familiar with. It means an unpaid leave of absence, and it is more commonly used in America. With many companies putting employees on furlough due to the impact of the coronavirus, the UK government last week announced that it would guarantee to pay up to 80% of those employees' salaries up to a cap of £2,500 per employee for a period of 3 months from the 1st of March 2020. Whether you're an employer or an employee grappling with these extraordinary circumstances, today's webinar with our guest Sarah-Jane Butler from Parental Choice is going to attempt to tackle the burning questions that you all have on what you should and should not do. I am your host this morning. My name is Juliet Turnbull and I'm the founder and CEO of 2 to 3 Days, a company with a strong purpose. Our mission is to advance women's equality in the workplace through the power of flexible working. Via our platform, we enable companies to advertise their flexible and business and professional roles directly to our online community of highly capable women who wish to pursue their careers on a flexible basis. The feedback from our clients is they are thrilled with the calibre of the talent in our community, and for the women, they are delighted with the quality of the roles available to them. But enough about me. I would now like to introduce you to our star guest, Sarah-Jane Butler, founder and CEO of Parental Choice. She's also a solicitor specialising in employment and commercial law. She mainly advises micro businesses and individuals with their employment law and queries, and has been a sole practitioner in this area for nearly 10 years, having worked in the city as a lawyer for 14 years before that. Her goal today is to ensure that our clients have practical legal advice to help them manage their employees or guide them with dealing with their employers. So over to you, SJ.
Thanks, Juliet. And hi, everybody. I can see some familiar faces on there. I hope you're all well. Before I start my slides up, I just want to kind of go through the boring legal bit first. The information I'm providing you today is based upon current HMRC guidance. However, that is changing on a fairly regular basis, as you can imagine. Furloughing is a new concept, as Juliet mentioned, under UK law and has barely reached the statute books. And so there is still a lot of uncertainty surrounding furloughing, and the devil, as always, is in the detail. You will find lots of accountants and lawyers who will not agree on how this process is to work. So any information I give you today is not intended to be specific legal advice, as you can imagine, each situation is going to be different. And by listening to this webinar, you are deemed to have accepted this, and therefore I'm not accepting any liability for anything that may or may not come out of this. If you wish to contact me separately, please do. I'm more than happy to advise you individually when I know the full extent of the circumstances. So, having said that, let us move on to the slides. I'm going to try and work through these. So furloughing, what does it mean? How does it work? And what do we need to know? I'm going to try and get through as many of your questions as possible. And we'll come back to your points in a minute. Next screen, please. So let's go to the basics. It's okay, right, here we are. So the basics are, so a furlough is an American term. A bit like in American, it's used by way of a sabbatical, or more likely an unpaid sabbatical. The UK has adopted this to mean a temporary period of leave decided upon by employers when they would otherwise have had to make redundancies during this COVID-19 period. It is, as I mentioned before, a new concept with no specific legal status at the moment. It is, however, it does constitute a change to the terms of your employment contract, your employee's employment contract. And therefore, it is very important to have written consent to any change in your employment status, especially where there is a reduction in wages. Now, going back up to the top, the government has brought in this furlough period and has agreed to pay up to 80% of wages, including national insurance and pension contributions, up to a cap of £2,500 per employee. It is meant to cover the majority of employees in this country who have on average, who earn approximately between £15,000 to £25,000. It is meant to be used where a company or a business is struggling and therefore would otherwise be making redundancies in this situation. You are not meant to work at all during this period. You are not allowed to do anything that would generate revenue or provide a service to your employer. Next slide, please. So the scheme was set up by HMRC to run for an initial period from the 1st of March to the 31st of May 2020. It is likely that as this continues, they may extend that period. Now, under the scheme, an employee can be furloughed by their employer for a minimum period of 3 weeks. There's no length of time that you can be furloughed, and or no sort of maximum time that you can be furloughed, because obviously the aim is that once you no longer need to be furloughed, you will revert back to doing your standard job on standard hours. Now, to be eligible, you must have been on the payroll as of the 28th of February. So if you have resigned and you are no longer on the payroll as of the 28th of February, then you are not allowed to be back put onto the system. Now, the scheme is available to all businesses, charities, recruitment agencies who pay their staff through PAYE, and public authorities. It covers all employees, full-time, part-time, 0 hours, etc., but it does not apply to self-employed. So those who are working as contractors or through their own company would not be entitled, well, they can be furloughed from their own company, but they would not be entitled to be furloughed by the people that they're working with. And as I've said, HMRC will pay 80% of usual wage costs up to 2,500 gross per worker, plus NIC and minimum auto-enrolment employer pension contributions. What happens on furlough? So as I've mentioned, an employee cannot work or provide any services whilst on furlough. You can work for somebody else whilst you're on furlough, provided that it does not clash with your employment contract. So if your employment contract says that you cannot work for anybody else without the consent of your employer, then you will need to get consent from your employer, because clearly they do not want you to go and work for a competitor. But if you are going to go and do other work like helping stack shelves in supermarket or helping with the NHS or whatever it might be, or you're going to do volunteer work, then that's absolutely fine. But if you are going to get work elsewhere, you need to get your employer's current consent, your current employer's consent. Lots of questions about can directors be furloughed? The answer is yes, but again, you cannot be doing any work. So you can carry out your statutory duties, but that's it. So you cannot be answering questions from clients, you cannot be generating revenue, you cannot be doing anything if you are genuinely on furlough. You can ask your employees to carry out training, but it has to be paid at least the national minimum wage for the time that is spent. So if that is more than the amount that they are being furloughed, then you will need to subsidise those costs. You will have to pay the difference. I think I've already gone over that they can't work for a competitor, and they can do volunteer work. Now, what happens about annual leave? Now, this is something that we're getting quite a few questions about, and what happens. Now, there are 4 different types of annual leave. There are 4 different types of leave that you will be aware of under UK law. There's annual leave, sick leave, paternity, maternity, shared parental leave, and then there's the general parental leave, which is unpaid. Now, all of those things still apply during this period, but whilst you are furloughed, you will still continue to accrue your holiday entitlement. Can you take annual leave during a furlough period? In short, no, you can't. So your options as an employer are to give notice to your employees to take their annual leave paid at their full rate before they are furloughed. You can end the furlough after the minimum of 3 weeks, require them to take their annual leave, paying them at full rate, and then put them back on furlough. And you can allow them to continue accruing holiday if, and this applies to both people who are working and also to people who are on furlough. You can allow them to continue accruing holiday which can now be carried over for 2 leave years rather than 1 leave year, immediately following the year in which that has accrued. Now, as an employer, you can ask, stroke demand, for your employees to take their annual leave, but you have to give the right length of notice. So if they want to take 2 days, you have to give them 2 days notice. If they want to take 2 weeks, they have to give if you want them to take 2 weeks leave, you have to give them 2 weeks notice. That equally applies if you wish to cancel their holiday. So again, you have to give the same level of notice to match up with the length of time that they were supposed to take on holiday. Obviously, it has to be a reasonable reason as to why you're cancelling it, and you have to agree with them another time when they could take their holiday at a future date, a future time. It's clearly a reasonable thing to ask now, because if you've got a huge amount of work, then you probably don't want your staff who are not being furloughed taking annual leave right now. So you can cancel that, and that's a pretty good reason why you can cancel it. Alternatively, the other situation is that where somebody has more than the statutory pay, i.e. they are on contractual leave, you may be able to agree with them that they swap their extra contractual leave for a top up in their pay. So for example, if they are entitled to 25 days plus 8 days holiday, which would give them 33 days, you can ask them, or they may ask you, and you can agree for them to waive those extra 5 days, i.e. the additional contractual element that they have in holiday entitlement, in order to act as a top up to their salary. So if where somebody is being furloughed on 80%, you may exchange 5 days to compensate, to top up their salary. So I've tried to cover some of the basics, and I hopefully have, in the meantime, have managed to answer some of your questions. I'm going to go through these questions now, and then I know Juliet has questions that she will fire at me.
And I will lots of questions coming in.
I can imagine. So I will try and go through these, and we'll refer to my notes as we go along. So firstly, how do you decide which employees you need to furlough? This is obviously quite a tricky one. But I think, for example, if I take my own business and explain what has happened with that. Now, we have 3 people that we have decided to put on furlough. And the real reason is they simply have nothing to do. Their work has completely dried up, and they are worrying and stressing about how to generate revenue, what services they can do, how they can help, when there really is absolutely nothing that they can do. And in that situation, there is no role for them. So otherwise they would be technically a clear example of a redundancy case. So we have furloughed them, told them to stay at home, and they're clearly they're worried about the situation, but they don't have anything to do. So for us, it makes sense to put them on furlough. You need to kind of look at where your work currently stands. So where is the work? Can you move them around? You can only, you don't have to furlough all of your staff. If you still have existing work available, and you can move people around, you can juggle their responsibilities, somebody can take on some more work or whatever it might be, then you can keep some people on full standard employment status, or you can furlough them. Clearly there may also be roles that cannot be done from home, and if they can't be done from home, then equally you can decide to furlough them, because they obviously cannot do the work in order to carry on. There will inevitably be people who want to be furloughed, and you need to, but ultimately it is the employer's decision to furlough them. And equally, you may have people who are at home who've got childcare issues, etc., who will say, well, can you not just furlough me? And the answer, unfortunately, is if an employer needs you to work and you can work from home, then at the end of the day, you should be working from home. I know that's hard because a lot of us have got children and we're trying to juggle the two together. But the reality is that if they've got work for you to do, you shouldn't be being furloughed, because if you can work, you should be working. Now, there is a, so that's the answer to the second question about can you ask to be furloughed? There's obviously a kind of work relationship issue between those who will be being furloughed and those who are still working. And there's bound to be some discontent between employees as they view those who have been furloughed as getting the easy ride while they continue to work. Because obviously they're saying, well, hang on a minute, I'm having to work and these guys are just sitting at home earning 80 to 100% doing nothing. What we have seen is that some employers are agreeing a bonus for those who agree to work. Some are agreeing extra holidays. Some are agreeing favourable treatment on redundancy selection if that does come up as in time. Some people are only paying their furlough staff 80%, and they're putting the 20%, the discretionary top up, because you don't have to top up that 20%. They're putting that discretionary top up into 20% top up into a pool, which they will then use to divide out as a bonus or as a thank you amongst their staff that are working. Next question. If an employee is sick, can they still be furloughed? No. If they are sick, they are sick. If they have been put on sick leave or they have an isolation note by 111, then only when they are registered fit to work can they then be furloughed. So if you're on sick leave, you're on sick leave. If you're on furlough leave, you're on furlough leave, full stop. And the same goes for maternity leave as well. You cannot mix the two. Can you still make employees redundant? Absolutely, yes, you can. The same rules still apply, but please do bear in mind that if you have somebody who is sick, they will still be covered. You must make sure that that dismissal is fair and you follow a due and proper procedure. Because if you are dismissing them because they are sick, then that is obviously a protected characteristic and you need to be very careful because you can't force them to come into work, for example. So you do have to you do have to follow a due and fair process. What happens at the end of all this? Well, at the end of all this, provided we all get out of this and it ends as soon as possible, and we haven't all gone completely stir crazy or pickled our livers with the amount of alcohol we're probably all drinking, then you will all go back to work. If there is a job there, you will go back to work. The employer does not have to pay back that money. It is a grant. It is not a loan. It is a grant. So it is the government that is paying. So there is no need to pay the government back, and there's no need as an employee for you to pay your employer back. The aim is that it will go back to normal, whatever the new normal is, and it will go back to normal, and people will still have jobs and they'll be able to carry on as normal. How do you claim the money back from HMRC? Well, this is quite a good question. The government sort of launched this, within a week and has left the rest of us practitioners scrambling around trying to figure out how it's going to work. It is all going to be done through HMRC, and the aim is that they're hoping to be able to start paying out the money under the furlough scheme or job retention scheme, as they're calling it, by the end of April. I mean, I wouldn't hold them to that, but that's what they're saying. So by the end of April, you should be able to register your employees through the job retention scheme, and they will ask for certain information, including what were they earning as of the 28th of February, details of their details, your PAYE reference details, etc. Your payroll company or your accountants should be able to register you for that scheme, and then the money is going to be paid back directly to your account. So it won't be paid to employees directly, it will be paid back to you. Now, at the moment, HMRC do not have a system. They have a system in order to pay overpaid tax, etc., back to employees, as some of you might know. So where you have done your self-assessment, etc., they're okay at paying the employees back, but previously they've never had to pay employers back. So that's why this system is being is taking a little bit of time to put through. Can those on parental leave be furloughed instead? Parental leave, as you are probably aware, is unpaid. The question really with that one is that if you have elected to take unpaid leave in order to look after your children at home, then it depends really on HMRC's guidance on this, which they have not specifically set out. If there is no work for you to do, then you can be furloughed. If there is work for you to do and you're at home and you can do that work, then your employer might say, no, I'm not going to furlough you. So the government has said, I mean, having said that, that's what the guidance is. And the government has said that they will be auditing employers at the end of this. So they will check that there is no fraud, no, people have not been fraudulently furloughed when they shouldn't have been. But it's unlikely that that they are going to be going around the millions of people who are going to be furloughed at the end of this. So I would have a conversation with your employer or with your employee, if that is the situation, and see to what extent, if there is work for them to do, then see to what extent they can do the work. If there is no work for them to do and they're at home, then yes, they can be furloughed and they can be taken off unpaid leave. So how does furloughing work with maternity leave? As I said before, with regards to sick leave, you're on one form of leave or the other. If you're on maternity leave, or rather if you are pregnant right now and it is coming up to you are within 2 or 3 months of your due date, then you can be put on furlough leave up to 11 weeks prior to your expected week of childbirth, and then you can be put onto maternity leave. So the government has the employer has the right, for health and safety reasons, up to 11 weeks before your expected week of childbirth, to then place you on maternity leave. So you should cover in any furlough letter that is written, combine the two letters. So you are, as an employer, you have to write a letter to your pregnant employee setting out the information that is contained within their MAP-B1 form, what they are, what you when you expect their maternity leave to start, what the payment arrangements will be, information about kick days, all of that sort of thing. If you are going to furlough somebody who is about to go on maternity leave, it would be a good idea to merge those two, to explain to them when furlough leave will stop, the furlough leave period will stop, and when the maternity leave period will start. Clearly, it's important for somebody on SMP to be eligible, which means they must have been working with you for a continuous 26-week period prior to the 15th week before the expected week of childbirth. So when you're calculating what they should or should not be entitled to, you may want to take this into consideration if you are then dropping their salary, their furlough, during the period of furlough, you're dropping their salary from 100% to 80%, because this will have an effect on the first 9 weeks worth of maternity pay that they would be entitled to. Okay, so I've now, I have now gone through my questions.
Okay, well done, SJ. You've done an amazing job. Do you want to grab a glass of water and
can't breathe now.
2 seconds, and I will. So what we have here, everybody, is we've had questions that have been emailed in and questions that you're all seeing come up in the chat box. I'm going to start. I'm going to start with one from, and I'm going to bat through them because some relate to more, can link into others. So I'm going to start with one from a guy called Simon. Can you bring a furloughed employee back off furlough with immediate effect, which I assume means suddenly you've got some work and you need that person who was originally furloughed because they had no work to do work?
Yes, you can, provided that you've got the minimum 3-week period.
Okay.
So if you put somebody on furlough for 1 week and then all of a sudden you get a new order in, or a new client comes through, you would have to wait another 2 weeks in order to furlough that person.
Okay. And I assume that means the same for nannies.
Yes.
Okay. What happens if there is work to do, but the workload doesn't support full-time hours due to a reduction in work? So you've taken somebody off because there is no work. You now need to bring them back on, but it's not quite at their full pace as it was before. What happens then?
Well, I think at this point it's a discussion to have with them. So what a lot of employers are doing is they're not placing people on furlough, they're reducing the employee salary by 25%, and therefore expecting them to do 25% less work. That is totally fine. That is a discussion that you need to have with your employees. It 100% must be in writing, to protect you as an employer, completely. Because I'm sure there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of cases in front of the employment tribunal at the end of all of this, where employers unilaterally made a decision, which you cannot do. You have to get consent. And I would 100% check all your employment contracts to make sure you've got amendment clauses in them, because if you don't, it makes it even harder. But you need to get your consent. If you are bringing people back off furlough, but they're not going to be brought back full time, they're going to be brought back part time with part salary, you need to get them to consent to that and then bring them back on.
Brilliant, thank you, SJ. Is the only way to get the HMRC money to furlough an employee? A lot of us have domestic help and they can't come into our houses because we're all in lockdown, and therefore they can't do their job, but they're not employees.
Well, it this only applies to employees.
It only applies to employees.
It only applies to employees. So if your domestic staff, cleaner, nanny is not on an employment contract and is not on PAYE, then this does not apply.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And yes, the only way to get the money is to go through HMRC PAYE payroll.
Okay. There's a question here from a lady called Lorna. Let me just scan it. So she's continuing to work at home alongside her director, but the business income has been reduced by 90%. And she's just trying to keep the business going, doing what she can. How is this expected that those left working will be paid if business income is so reduced? So I think the question there is her employer has either got to furlough her or not.
Yeah, you've kind of got the option. You either had to take a massive pay cut to match the cash flow that is coming in, yeah. And you agree to do that on a temporary basis, or somebody gets furloughed, and in which case you get, but clearly if you're then furloughed, you can't work. So it's then down to your director to do all of the work.
Yeah. And
I mean, the reality is that a lot of businesses are still going to go under. I mean, unfortunately, that is just the case, because a business has more than just their employment costs to manage. You know, you have rent, you have suppliers, you have all sorts of other costs to cover. And it is very much, and that's why the government has also introduced these coronavirus business interruption loans, which obviously you would have all heard a lot about in the papers and on the news. The banks are not exactly being helpful, let's be honest about this, especially since we bailed them out last time. But that is why these loans have been brought in by the government, to try and cover these extra costs which they cannot cover through this job retention scheme.
Okay, we've got a very valid question here. Is there any protection or provision for employees who are currently pregnant? And I assume what this lady's asking is, if she is furloughed while she's pregnant now, what does that mean to her and her employment rights?
Right, you still have exactly the same employment rights, and being pregnant or on maternity leave is a protected characteristic. So you have a day one right to be protected with regards unfair dismissal, for example. So all the same rights, exactly the same situation still applies. Definitely still applies. You still need to be looked after, as you are also deemed to be in a high risk group. So one of the groups that the government has requested to be shielded in this time. There's all these new words that we never knew before, shielded and furloughed and all this kind of new concepts, that you would still have exactly the same rights. So if you are pregnant and you are furloughed, then you should be furloughed on exactly the same terms as anybody else should be furloughed. And then, as I said, if you're then moving on to maternity leave, you should then move on to maternity leave. If it comes to redundancies, then clearly you should be at the back of the queue when it comes to any redundancies being made. It doesn't stop, being pregnant doesn't stop you from being made redundant. You can still be made redundant, but if there's any alternative employment available, then you should be first in line to get it.
Okay, thank you, SJ. Now moving on the subject of, sadly, on redundancy, what happens at the end of this, what is expected at the end of this furlough period of 3 months if the business hasn't returned to normal and redundancy is the only option? Claire would like to know how redundancy pay is going to be calculated, as her understanding is it's the number of full years service by the average of their last 13 weeks of pay. How will the furlough period be brought in to help with the calculation of the redundancy payment?
It will be based on that. So if you're on 80%, it will be 80% and go back 100%. It really depends on what situation your business is in, your company is in. If you get to the end of the 3-month period and, well, at the moment the government is saying it's probably going to extend that, so you might get to that. But if you, at any point in time, if it gets to the state where, frankly, there is no money in the company and it cannot continue trading, then there won't be any redundancy money, full stop. I mean, that's the reality. If you're going to make people redundant, you have to follow their notice period within their contract, and you'll have to pay their notice period as well as the redundancy, which, as you said, depends very much on which depends on how long you've been there and your age. So it's half a week. I think it's half a week if you're under 25, and then 1.5 weeks if you're over 50, but don't quote me on that one. I'm just trying to think it off the top of my head. But yes, it is based on your statutory redundancy pay, which you would get in addition to your notice pay. But frankly, if the company has no money and it's going into administration, then it could be that you end up with nothing. Yeah,
that's a real shame. There are a couple of questions that have been around when people have resigned around at the end of February. What happens if somebody resigned at the end of February or the beginning of March, the day it all kicked off, and then obviously the job they were going to is no longer available? Can the original employer take them back, and or can the original employer put them on furlough because where they were going they know they're no longer needed, or can their new employer put them straight onto furlough?
So the new employer would not be able to put them onto furlough because they weren't on the payroll as of the 28th of February. It depends if you are, the government seemed to have forgotten actually there was a 29th of February. So if effectively your leave date was the 29th of February and your P45 was dated the 29th of February and therefore you were still on the payroll as of the 28th of February, then theoretically, yes, you could be rehired. It's one of those grey areas. You're kind of fallen within that gap. Definitely your new employer would not be able to take you on. That is for sure. Whether you could be taken back on, well, you could always try. I think that's one of those situations where people, I'm trying to find, I did write some notes about this. Can we rehire someone that you've already made redundant? So that was one of the questions. So yes, if you've made the person redundant after the 28th of February, you can rehire them. And in fact, the scheme encourages you to do so. You're not obliged to do so, but you know, you have to sort of be aware that you may still, you know, if you take them back on, they are going to continue accruing holiday and be entitled to all the benefits that they previously were on prior to that. So I would say, yes, you possibly could take them back on. Depends on the circumstances. Some of you might not want to take them back on. They might have left and you might be glad that they have gone. Okay.
Please, any more in the chat, any more questions, please put them through into the chat box. I'm going to just take a few that have been emailed through to us. please could you cover 0 hours employees and how these should be treated in March when you combine their worked hours?
So 0-hour contract employees are covered by this. Obviously, it's difficult to know. It's based on what their salary or what they earned as of the payroll as of the 28th of February. So in essence, what they worked in March is not relevant for that point of view. When we're talking about furloughing, it is what's happening as of the 28th of February.
Okay. And I think this question, I will just answer it so that you've answered this earlier, really, that it's the employer that does request the furloughing rather than the employee. But there's somebody who's set up as a limited company and they want to know if it influences their IR35 in any way.
It shouldn't influence your IR35 situation. It's difficult with agencies in the IR35 position, as you well know. You are not an employee if you work, well, you're an employee for your limited company. You are not an employee for the agency or for the public authority that you're working with. Because obviously it doesn't apply to private companies now, because that's been postponed until next year. So your limited company could, provided you are on payroll with your limited company, could furlough you. If you're a director, then you'd still be able to, if you've literally got a limited company and there's only you in it, if you are a director, you're allowed to do your statutory duties. If you are a employee, and therefore you have been paying PAYE, or your limited company has been paying PAYE on your behalf, then your limited company can apply to have you furloughed. Okay. It's a bit like it's a bit you know, one hand doing one thing and one hand doing the other.
Okay. Another lady's asked, do you need to pay employee and employer tax during the furlough period?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. And
there isn't, sorry, I should say there isn't such thing as employee and employer tax. There is just tax. Effectively, if you mean national insurance contributions, the thing is yes. There is just PAYE. So as an employer, you are paying the employee's tax on their behalf. Just to sort of clarify it, there's not two forms of tax.
Okay, and here's an interesting one. There are obviously some very kind people out there. Can you re-employ someone and put them on furlough just so that they have an income coming in? So it looks like somebody out there has asked somebody to leave their company because they don't need them. This person has clearly is being made as redundant and isn't earning anything, and this company out of kindness wants to know whether they could re-employ them over the furlough period just so they could get some income coming in from the government.
Yes, they can. Okay.
Another lady has asked, would you mind just going over what do you do about trading a week's annual leave to top up furlough?
Okay,
I think that was a benefit that you could.
Yeah, you can. I'm just trying to find, wrote some notes on this yesterday, so I explain it a little further. Hang on.
You're doing an amazing job, SJ.
Well, I'll take a big deep breath in a minute. Right, hang on. Sorry, if I can. Where are we? Sorry. Okay, so when it comes to annual leave, okay, the position is that, so to an extent that an employee's contractual annual leave entitlement exceeds the minimum statutory entitlement of 5.6 weeks, it may be possible to expressly agree that the employee will, quote unquote, waive their enhanced entitlement in exchange for their pay being topped up beyond the 80% during the period of furlough leave. So, for example, if an employee's contract provides for 25 days holiday plus 8 days bank holidays, then the agreement can be sought to waive 5 days of that entitlement and convert it into cash, which can then be used to top up their furlough leave pay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very good. That's very clear. Alexis is the owner of 2 businesses and she's the director of both. One business is going down, but the other one she is a consultant for. Can she be furloughed on the first one and moved to an employee on the second one?
So if you are under PAYE on the first company, and this is it, because not all directors are employees. It depends on the contract. So you can have director service agreements, but they're not employees, i.e. they probably get paid through dividends or directors' loans or something like that. So if you have an employment contract and you are being paid through PAYE on your first company, then yes, you can furlough yourself if there's no work. If you're a consultant for your second company, no, you can't, because you weren't an employee as of the 28th of February.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, on that one, there's another director question coming in. If you are furloughed as a director of your own limited company, can you invoice for work you did at the beginning of March as the work was done prior to putting yourself on furlough?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Gosh, they're coming in thick and fast here. Could you please confirm the 3-week minimum period rule? Is it that if you furlough someone, they have to be furloughed for at least 3 weeks and can't be brought back off furlough earlier than that, even if you suddenly need them to do work?
Correct.
Okay. It is still not clear if the only way you can claim HMRC money is if the pay. Yes, is it clear that you can only claim from the HMRC if the employee was PAYE?
Yeah, so you can only claim from the government. There's 2 conditions. Number 1, they must have been employed with you as of the 28th of February. So they must have been on PAYE. If you don't furlough them, then you have to still continue paying them their full salary, even if they're not coming into work. So you, because if they've been told, well, obviously we're all in lockdown, and none of us can work. It's one of those things, unfortunately, people are kind of saying, well, do I go into work? Do I not go into work? You know, there's obviously a lot of people who are going into work. Construction people are going into work. Shop workers are going into work. There's a lot of people who aren't necessarily key workers who are going into work. And there's a big debate. I mean, Parental Choice runs the payroll for, and I'm seeing a lot of my clients on here, Parental Choice runs the payroll for a lot of people who have nannies. And there's a big debate about whether nannies can or cannot come into work. And there's no specific guidance on this. So it's a tricky one for me to give definitive advice on. But effectively, if there is no work for them to do, and this is sort of where it's clearly for nannies, for example, it is a tricky situation because there is work for them to do. They can't work from home, and therefore could they come into work for you? And I think the answer we've been giving to people is it really depends on your circumstances, because if somebody can drive to you, carry out the work and come back without putting themselves at risk, then they may choose to come into work. They may, on the other hand, be complying with the government's guidance, which is they don't want to come to work because of social distancing, etc. Now, at that point in time, you may argue, well, I'm at home with the children, therefore I have no work for them to do. And bear in mind that not everybody has nannies, and everyone is very much in the position where they have to juggle their kids and their work life and everything else. Believe me, I've got 2 myself, and they're being very quiet right now, which probably means they're getting up to some kind of mischief. But effectively, if they have no work for them to do, then you should be probably furloughing them.
Brilliant. Okay, and there's a chap here who is on a 0 hours contract, and he has not been furloughed. There is no work for him, but he is watching his full-time employee, I assume, get some of the work that ordinarily he would have been asked to do on a 0 hours contract. Is there any recompense for this chap?
It's a very tricky situation, and it depends on the terms of your 0-hour contract, because the 0-hour contract normally says there's no obligation on you to work and there's no obligation on the employer to give you work. So it would very much depend on what the terms of your contract say as to whether you should be receiving anything or not.
Okay. Any more questions? Otherwise, I think we need to let SJ go and have a very large alcoholic beverage at lunchtime, because she's done an outstanding job. But we'll take 2 more questions if there's anything more. Oh, Andy's come in.
Hi, Addie. How are you? Oh, I know Addie.
Addie, if
Hi,
someone is shielding, and that brackets a nanny who is pregnant, presume I can furlough?
Yes, you can.
You can furlough, Addie. So that's the answer to your question. Anything else from anybody else? And I have a question to ask SJ. If there was, let us know, but we could run this again once we've hydrated and fed SJ and allowed her to sleep. So if you'd like us, yes, please.
Could I also,
another question. Hang on.
I also, especially for those out there who have got nannies, on our website, so if you go to pcpayroll.co.uk, there is in the top left-hand corner a link which says Corona Advice Hub, and it's got a lot of information on there about, can somebody go into work? How does the job retention scheme works? How do I get my money? And so on and so forth. So I don't know if you want me to type it into the chat box here, but if you go to www.pcpayroll.co.uk, oh, can't spell, sorry, .co.uk, and then I'm hoping everybody can see that. And then in the, as I said, in the top right-hand corner, there is a whole coronavirus hub, basically, with lots of information on there for you to use. And that might give you lots of information and might help, especially those of you who've got nannies. It might help to answer a lot of the questions that you have.
Okay, Hannah would like us to answer her question, which came in towards the beginning. Hannah, I hope this is the question you want us to answer. If an employee returns to work after furlough, will they be made redundant immediately, or will they need to have a grace period? I'm in the charity sector and will need a few months to get the fundraising pipeline back up and running, but I feel my employees might use this as an excuse to ask me to make them redundant almost immediately.
They still have to follow the due and fair process when it comes to redundancy. So they still have to give you notice, and they still have, depending on how many people there are working, especially if there are more than 20 people within your organisation, they've got to go through a consultation process with you. So they still have to be seen to be following a due and fair process in accordance with the rules on redundancy. So it may be that you're on furlough and they start that redundancy process whilst you're on furlough. That is possible. But if you get back from furlough and everyone is expected to be back to normal, and they then say, well, actually we can't continue, we just don't have enough money coming in, or there is no role anymore, or whatever it might be, they still have to go through the process of looking for alternative employment, of consulting with you, and obviously going through the whole notice period. So it's not as if you come back on the Monday and the next day they can make you redundant. They still have to follow the due and fair processes required for redundancy.
Okay, I'm going to let you stop now. You have done an outstanding job, and I think what we would love is a follow-up session sort of post-Easter, once we've all troughed our way through too many Easter eggs, when there's a bit more clarity around what the government is going to do. So if that's possible, that would be amazing. But there's lots of thank yous coming in, and I think you've done an outstanding job to clarify a very big and grey area that is causing a huge amount of sensitivity and concern to employers and employees across the country. So
Yeah.
thank you very much
Oh,
indeed.
my pleasure. And if anybody does need any help at all, if there are specific things that you do need and require to your own situation, you know, do feel free to contact me. I don't mind. I'm here to help. I mean, the whole reason why I moved from the city to helping small businesses and employees was basically to be able to help out about, you know, normal people rather than the banks and the other people that I was previously helping. So I have put my email address on there. That is my email address. Please bear with me if I don't get back to you immediately. But if you would like some help, I'm here to help.
And just to final off, we will be sending a recording of this webinar to everybody, including the slides. Just give us a little bit of time to pull that together, but an email will follow very, very shortly. Enjoy the sunshine and take care, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.